Hello everyone, and welcome back to the channel. I hope you're all having a wonderful day or evening, wherever you might be in the world right now. Let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. I always love hearing from all corners of the globe, and it's amazing to think that we're all connected here through these stories that have shaped our world. Whether you're settling in for the night, taking a break from work, or just looking for something fascinating to listen to, you've come to the right place. Get comfortable, grab your favorite drink, maybe dim the lights a little, and let's embark on a journey together that's going to take us deep into one of the most misunderstood and romanticized periods in maritime history. Tonight we're going to explore something that most people think they know about, but actually have completely wrong. When you hear the word pirate, your mind probably goes to Hollywood movies with swashbuckling heroes, treasure maps, and dashing. Rogues with hearts of gold sailing the seven seas in search of adventure and romance. You might think of Captain Jack Sparrow with his charming wit and moral flexibility, or perhaps the classical image of a pirate captain with a tricorn hat, a parrot on his shoulder, and a twinkle in his eye as he searches for buried treasure on some tropical island. These images are so deeply embedded in our popular culture that we've almost completely forgotten the brutal reality of what piracy actually was. The truth is that real pirates weren't the lovable rogues of fiction. They were some of the most violent, ruthless, and organized criminals in human history, and they operated under a system of laws and regulations that was far more sophisticated and far more brutal than anything Hollywood has ever shown us. This system was called the Pirate Code, and it wasn't just a loose set of guidelines or suggestions. It was a comprehensive legal framework that governed every aspect of pirate life, from how treasure was divided to how justice was administered, from how new crew members were recruited to how traitors were executed. The Pirate Code was real. It was detailed, it was ruthlessly enforced, and it was absolutely brutal in ways that would shock you. These weren't simple rules like share the treasure equally or respect your captain. These were complex legal documents that covered everything from maritime law to criminal justice, from democratic governance to military strategy. They established voting procedures, outlined punishment systems, created insurance policies for injured pirates, and even regulated gambling and drinking aboard ship. But here's what makes this truly fascinating, and what we're going to explore in detail tonight. The Pirate Code wasn't just about maintaining order among criminals. It was actually one of the most progressive and democratic systems of governance in the entire world during the 17th and 18th centuries, at a time when most of Europe was still ruled by absolute monarchs, when common people had no voice in government, when workers had no rights and slaves were considered property. Pirates were creating societies based on democratic principles, equal representation, and workers' rights. They were electing their leaders, voting on major decisions, providing health care and disability benefits, and ensuring that everyone got their fair share of profits. In many ways, pirate ships were more democratic and more egalitarian than any nation on earth at that time. And this is crucial, this progressive democracy came with a price that was paid in blood, torture, and death. The same code that protected pirates' rights and ensured democratic governance also prescribed punishments so severe and so creative in their cruelty that they would make medieval executioners seem merciful by comparison. Pirates who violated the code faced everything from marooning on deserted islands to being keel-hauled under the ship's hull, from having their ears and noses cut off to being shot, hanged, or thrown overboard. The code didn't just govern how pirates treated each other either. It also established rules for how they would treat their victims, and these rules were designed to maximize terror, ensure compliance, and create a reputation so fearsome that merchant ships would surrender without a fight, rather than face the consequences of resistance. Tonight we're going to dive deep into this world and uncover the truth about how pirates really lived, how they really governed themselves, and how they really died. We'll explore the actual text of famous pirate codes, examine specific cases of how these laws were enforced, and learn about the real pirates who created and lived under these brutal but surprisingly sophisticated systems. We'll discover how Bartholomew Roberts, known as Black Bart, created one of the most comprehensive pirate codes in history, governing a fleet of over 400 men across multiple ships. We'll learn about the democratic procedures that pirates used to elect their captains and make group decisions, procedures that were more advanced than those used by most European governments of the time. We'll examine the ingenious ways that pirates divided their treasure, not just equally among all crew members, but according to complex formulas that took into account rank, experience, injury compensation, and special contributions to the crews. Success, but we'll also unflinch from the darker side of this story. We'll learn about the horrific punishments that awaited pirates who broke the code, the systematic torture methods they used on prisoners, and the reign of terror they established across the Caribbean, the Atlantic, and the Indian Ocean. We'll discover how pirates used psychological warfare, carefully crafted reputations, and strategic brutality to control vast areas of ocean and extract tribute from entire nations. This isn't going to be a sanitized version of pirate history. We're going to explore the full truth, both the surprisingly progressive aspects of pirate society and the absolutely brutal realities of life under the pirate code. We'll examine how these criminal organizations developed complex hierarchies, sophisticated logistics networks, and international trading relationships that allowed them to operate successfully for decades, despite being hunted by every navy in the world. The story begins in the late 1600s, during what historians call the Golden Age of piracy, a period that lasted roughly from 1650 to 1730, and saw thousands of pirates operating across the world's oceans. This wasn't a random outbreak of criminal activity. It was the result of specific historical conditions that created both the opportunity and the necessity for large-scale piracy. The major European powers, Spain, France, England, and later the Netherlands, were locked in almost constant warfare during this period, fighting for control of overseas colonies, trade routes, and maritime supremacy. To supplement their navies, these nations issued letters of marque to private ship owners, essentially licensing them to attack and capture enemy vessels. These licensed pirates were called privateers, and they were given legal authority to commit what would otherwise be acts of piracy, as long as they only targeted enemy ships and shared a portion of their profits with the government that had licensed them. The problem was that wars ended, but privateers didn't want to give up their profitable and exciting careers. When peace treaties were signed and letters of marque were revoked, thousands of experienced sea fighters suddenly found themselves unemployed, but they still had ships, weapons, and the skills to use them. Many simply continued doing what they had been doing legally during wartime, except now they did it illegally during peacetime. They became pirates. At the same time, the colonial economy was creating perfect conditions for piracy to flourish. European colonies in the Americas were producing vast quantities of valuable goods: sugar from the Caribbean, silver from Peru and Mexico, tobacco from Virginia, and various exotic products from colonies around the world. All of these goods had to be shipped back to Europe on heavily loaded but lightly defended merchant vessels. The shipping routes were predictable, the ships were slow, and the profits were enormous. It was like having unguarded treasure caravans traveling the same roads at the same times every year. The colonial governments were weak and corrupt, often unable or unwilling to provide adequate protection for merchant shipping. Many colonial officials were actually in business with pirates, taking bribes to look the other way, or even providing information about valuable cargo shipments in exchange for a share of the profits. Some entire colonial settlements became pirate havens, providing safe harbors, supplies, and markets where pirates could sell their stolen goods and spend their profits. Into this environment stepped some of the most remarkable and terrifying figures in maritime history. These weren't the bumbling, lovable rogues of popular fiction. They were brilliant military strategists, charismatic leaders, and absolutely ruthless criminals who understood that their survival depended on maintaining discipline within their crews and projecting terror to their enemies. They realized that a ship full of criminals and misfits couldn't function without strict rules and severe punishments. But they also understood that these rules had to be accepted by the crew rather than imposed by authority, because any crew member who was unhappy could simply mutiny, kill the officers, and take over the ship. This led to the development of the Pirate Code, a system of laws that was both democratic and brutal, progressive and terrifying. The most famous and comprehensive pirate code was created by Bartholomew Roberts, a Welsh pirate who was known as Black Bar and who became one of the most successful pirate captains in history. Roberts was born around 1682 and started his career as a legitimate sailor, working on merchant ships and slave traders. He was actually captured by pirates in 1719 and initially forced to join their crew, but he quickly showed such aptitude for piracy that he was elected captain when the previous captain was killed. Over the next 4 years, Roberts and his crews captured over 400 ships, making him arguably the most successful pirate in history. But Roberts wasn't just successful because he was a good fighter or a lucky raider. He succeeded because he was a brilliant organizer and administrator who understood that piracy was fundamentally a business that required careful management, clear procedures, and strict discipline. Roberts created a comprehensive code of laws that governed every aspect of life aboard his ships, and this code became the model that many other pirate crews adopted. Roberts' code began with the most fundamental principle of pirate democracy. Every man has a vote in affairs of moment, has equal title to the fresh provisions or strong liquors at any time seized, and may use them at pleasure, unless a scarcity makes it necessary, for the good of all, to vote a retrenchment. This wasn't just a nice sentiment about equality. It was a radical departure from the authoritarian structure of naval and merchant ships, where officers had absolute power over common sailors. On Roberts' ships, every crew member had an equal voice in major decisions, equal access to food and drink, and equal rights under the law. The code continued. Every man to be called fairly in turn, by list, on board of prizes because, over and above their proper share, they were on these occasions allowed a shift of clothes. But if they defrauded the company to the value of $1, in plate, jewels, or money, marooning was their punishment. This clause established several important principles. First, it created a fair rotation system for boarding captured ships, which was important because the men who boarded prizes first had the best opportunity to loot valuable small items. Second, it allowed boarding parties extra compensation in the form of clothing and personal items. Third, it established that anyone who cheated the crew by hiding treasure would face marooning, which was essentially a death sentence. Marooning involved abandoning the guilty party on a small, uninhabited island with minimal supplies, usually just a pistol with one shot, a small amount of water, and perhaps some hardtack biscuits. The marooned pirate could choose to try to survive on the island, which was nearly impossible, or use the pistol to end his suffering quickly. The code addressed the crucial question of leadership. No person to game at cards or dice for money. This might seem like a minor issue, but gambling was a major source of conflict aboard ships. Men who had risked their lives capturing treasure could lose their shares in a card game, leading to fights, resentment, and potential mutiny. By banning gambling for money, the code prevented these conflicts and ensured that each man kept the share he had earned. The lights and candles to be put out at 8 o'clock at night. If any of the crew After that hour still remained inclined for drinking, they were to do it on the open deck. This rule served multiple purposes. It conserved candles and lamp oil, which were valuable supplies, but more importantly, it prevented drunk pirates from accidentally starting fires below deck, which could destroy the ship and kill everyone aboard. It also meant that anyone drinking late at night would be visible to others and couldn't engage in secret plotting or planning. To keep their piece, pistols, and cutlass clean and fit for service. This was a military regulation that ensured every crew member maintained his weapons in fighting condition. Pirates never knew when they might need to fight, whether against their victims, against naval forces trying to capture them, or against other pirate crews competing for the same prizes. A pirate with a malfunctioning weapon was not just useless in a fight, he was a liability to his crewmates. No boy or woman to be allowed amongst them. If any man were to be found seducing any of the latter sex, and carried her to sea, disguised, he was to suffer death. This rule was designed to prevent the conflicts and jealousies that would inevitably arise if women were aboard ship. In an all-male environment where men lived in close quarters for months at a time, the presence of women would create competition, favoritism, and violence that could tear the crew apart. The penalty of death for bringing a woman aboard showed how seriously pirates took this threat to crew unity. To desert the ship or their quarters in battle was punished with death or marooning. This military discipline was essential for pirate success. Pirates won fights through coordinated action and mutual support. A man who abandoned his post in battle endangered everyone else and could cause the entire crew to be killed or captured. A code made it clear that cowardice in battle was unforgivable. No striking one another on board, but every man's quarrels to be ended on shore, at sword and pistol. This rule prevented fights from breaking out aboard ship, where they could disrupt operations and potentially damage vital equipment. Instead, disputes were settled through formal duels on land, which satisfied honor while limiting the damage to crew morale and effectiveness. None to talk of breaking up their way of living, till each had shared 1,000 pounds. If in order to this, any man should lose a limb or become a cripple in their service, he was to have $800 out of the public stock, and, for lesser hurts, proportionately. This clause established several revolutionary concepts. First, it created a minimum profit target that each crew member should achieve before considering retirement from piracy. Second, and more remarkably, it established what was essentially a disability insurance system. Pirates who were injured in service would receive compensation from the crew's common fund, with the amount depending on the severity of the injury. This was centuries ahead of any similar system in legitimate employment. The captain and quartermaster to receive 2 shares of a prize, the master, boatswain, and gunner 1 share and a half, and other officers 1 1/4. This established a clear and fair system for dividing profits. Unlike merchant or naval ships, where officers might receive vastly more compensation than common sailors, pirate crews kept the difference relatively small. The captain, who had the most responsibility and took the greatest risks, received only twice as much as ordinary crew members. This system ensured that everyone had a strong incentive to work for the crew's success while still providing appropriate rewards for leadership and specialized skills. The musicians to have rest on the Sabbath day, but the other 6 days and nights, none without special favor. This rule shows the importance of morale and entertainment aboard pirate ships. Musicians provided essential psychological benefits, keeping spirits up during long voyages and providing entertainment during celebrations. By giving musicians 1 day of rest per week, the code ensured they wouldn't become overworked and resentful, while still requiring them to provide music when needed. But Robert's Code was just one example of the sophisticated legal systems that pirates developed. Other famous pirate captains created their own variations, each adapted to their specific crews and circumstances. Captain John Phillips, who operated in the Atlantic during the early 1720s, created a code that included additional provisions about the treatment of prisoners and the division of personal effects from captured ships. His code specified that prisoners who were skilled craftsmen carpenters, doctors, musicians, or navigators should be well treated and encouraged to join the crew voluntarily, while prisoners who resisted or tried to hide valuable cargo should be tortured to extract information. Captain Edward Lowe, one of the most notoriously cruel pirates of the era, had a code that emphasized the psychological aspects of piracy. Lowe understood that much of a pirate's success came from reputation and intimidation. Merchant ships that believed they would be tortured and killed if they resisted were much more likely to surrender immediately, which made piracy safer and more profitable for the pirates. Lowe's code therefore included detailed procedures for creating and maintaining a terrifying reputation, including specific methods for torturing prisoners in ways that would be witnessed and reported by survivors. The code required that some prisoners always be released or ransomed so they could spread stories about Lowe's cruelty, ensuring that future victims would know what awaited them if they fought back. These codes weren't just theoretical documents. They were actively enforced through sophisticated legal procedures that would have been familiar to any contemporary European court. Pirates held formal trials for crew, members accused of violating the code, with evidence presented, witnesses called, and verdicts reached by majority vote. The accused had the right to defend themselves and to call character witnesses. The crew served as both judge and jury, hearing the case and voting on guilt or innocence. If a pirate was found guilty, the punishment was swift and often brutal. Minor offenses might result in loss of shares from the next prize, reduction in food rations, or assignment to extra duties. More serious crimes could result in flogging, where the guilty party was tied to the ship's rigging and whipped with a cat-o'-nine tails, a whip with 9 separate lashes that could tear flesh from bone. The most serious violations of the code resulted in death or marooning. Executions were usually carried out by hanging, shooting, or forcing the condemned man to walk the plank, though this last method was actually much rarer than popular culture suggests. More commonly, condemned pirates were simply shot or stabbed and their bodies thrown overboard. Marooning was considered by many pirates to be worse than immediate death because it involved prolonged suffering and eventual death by starvation, thirst, or exposure. The marooned pirate was typically left on a small, uninhabited island or sandbar with minimal supplies, a bottle of water, some hardtack biscuits, and a pistol with a single shot. The pistol was intended as a mercy, allowing the marooned man to end his own suffering when the situation became unbearable. Some marooned pirates did manage to survive and escape. The most famous case was that of Alexander Selkirk, a privateer, who was marooned on an uninhabited island in the Pacific and survived alone for 4 years before being rescued. Selkirk's story became the inspiration for Daniel Defoe's novel Robinson Crusoe, but Selkirk was extraordinarily lucky. Most marooned pirates died within days or weeks. The pirate codes also established complex procedures for recruiting new crew members. Pirates needed a constant supply of fresh recruits because their lifestyle resulted in high casualties from fighting, disease, accidents, and legal execution. However, they couldn't simply kidnap people and force them to become pirates because unwilling crew members were unreliable and dangerous. Instead, pirates developed sophisticated recruitment methods that combined coercion with incentives. When pirates captured a merchant ship, they would typically offer the crew a choice: join the pirate crew voluntarily and receive full rights and shares under the pirate code, or be released to continue their journey. However, this choice wasn't always entirely free. Pirates would often keep captured ships and crews for several days or weeks, during which time they would demonstrate the benefits of pirate life. They would show the captured sailors how much wealth the pirates had accumulated, how democratically the crew made decisions, and how much better the food and living conditions were compared to merchant ships. They would also make it clear what would happen to anyone who later betrayed the pirate crew or attempted to escape. Many sailors, particularly those who had been mistreated by merchant ship officers or who were facing poverty and hardship in legitimate employment, chose to join pirate crews voluntarily. These recruits were generally the most reliable pirates because they had made a conscious decision to adopt the pirate lifestyle. However, pirates also used more coercive recruitment methods when necessary. Skilled specialists like navigators, doctors, carpenters, and gunners were so valuable that pirates would sometimes force them to join the crew, whether they wanted to or not. These impressed pirates were usually treated well and given opportunities to prove their loyalty, but they were also watched carefully for signs of treachery or attempts to escape. The codes established detailed procedures for integrating new recruits into the crew. New pirates had to swear an oath to obey the code and remain loyal to their crewmates. This oath was taken very seriously and was often accompanied by elaborate ceremonies involving blood, rum, and symbolic gestures. New recruits were typically assigned to work alongside experienced pirates who could teach them the skills they needed and evaluate their reliability. They received smaller shares of prize money until they had proven themselves in battle and demonstrated their commitment to the crew. The democratic aspects of pirate society extended beyond simple voting on major decisions. Pirates held regular meetings, called moot, where any crew member could raise concerns, propose changes to their operations, or bring accusations against fellow pirates. These meetings followed parliamentary procedures that were more sophisticated than those used by many legitimate governments at the time. There were rules about who could speak when, how long they could speak, and how decisions would be made. When the crew was divided, the position of captain was usually elective, with the crew voting to choose their leader based on his experience, fighting ability, leadership skills, and success in previous ventures. However, the captain's power was limited compared to that of naval or merchant ship captains. A pirate captain commanded absolute authority during battles and emergencies, but during normal operations, major decisions were made collectively by the crew. The captain could be removed from office by a majority vote if the crew lost confidence in his leadership. This happened frequently, and many successful pirates served under multiple captains during their careers. The position of quartermaster was equally important and also elective. The quartermaster was responsible for maintaining discipline, settling disputes between crew members, and ensuring fair distribution of food, water, and other supplies. During battles, the quartermaster often led boarding parties, while the captain directed the overall attack. The quartermaster also served as a check on the captain's power, representing the crew's interests and ensuring that the captain didn't abuse his authority. The pirate codes also established sophisticated systems for handling the business aspects of piracy. Pirates had to sell their stolen goods, purchase supplies, maintain and repair their ships, and manage their financial affairs. This required extensive networks of contacts in various ports, including merchants who would buy stolen goods without asking questions, shipyard workers who would repair pirate vessels, and suppliers who would provide food, water, weapons, and other necessities. Many colonial settlements became pirate havens because local merchants and officials found it profitable to do business with pirates. Pirates had large amounts of cash and were willing to pay premium prices for goods and services, making them attractive customers despite the legal risks involved. Some colonial governors actually commissioned pirates as privateers, giving them legal cover to continue their activities while ensuring that a portion of their profits flowed to the colonial government. The most famous pirate haven was Port Royal in Jamaica, which became known as the wickedest city on earth because of its association with pirates and other criminals. Port Royal provided everything pirates needed: safe harbor, supplies, entertainment, and markets for stolen goods. The city's merchants, tavern keepers, and prostitutes all profited from the pirate trade, and local officials were either bribed to look the other way or were actively involved in pirate operations themselves. The relationship between pirates and colonial society was complex and often contradictory. While pirates were criminals who threatened legitimate commerce, they also provided valuable services to colonial communities. Pirates brought Spanish silver and other foreign goods into colonial markets, providing currency and trade goods that were otherwise difficult to obtain. They also served as an unofficial navy for colonies that couldn't afford their own warships, protecting colonial shipping from foreign enemies and competing pirates. During times of war, colonial governments often found it useful to have experienced fighters available who could be quickly commissioned as privateers. Many pirates were skilled sailors and fighters who could be valuable assets in naval battles. Some pirates even became legitimate colonial officials, using their wealth and connections to purchase respectability and political power. However, the relationship between pirates and colonial authorities became increasingly strained as piracy grew more organized and threatening. Large pirate fleets like those commanded by Bartholomew Roberts or Edward Teach, known as Blackbeard, began to threaten entire regions rather than just individual ships. They established bases on isolated islands, collected tribute from merchant vessels, and interfered with colonial trade on a scale that could no longer be ignored or tolerated. The turning point came when pirates began attacking not just foreign ships, but also vessels belonging to their own colonial sponsors. Pirates who had been welcomed in colonial ports, as long as they only targeted Spanish or French ships suddenly, found themselves unwelcome when they began capturing English colonial vessels as well. The logic of piracy made this inevitable, because pirates needed to attack whatever ships they encountered that carried valuable cargo, regardless of nationality. As piracy became more threatening to colonial interests, European governments began to take serious action to suppress it. The Royal Navy was expanded and given specific orders to hunt down and destroy pirate operations. New laws were passed that made it easier to prosecute pirates, and that imposed severe penalties on colonial officials who cooperated with them. Special courts were established in colonial ports with authority to try and execute pirates without sending them back to Europe for trial. The suppression campaign was remarkably effective because it targeted not just individual pirates, but the entire infrastructure that supported piracy. Naval forces attacked pirate bases. Colonial governments were forced to stop cooperating with pirates, and merchants who dealt in stolen goods faced prosecution. Without safe harbors, reliable supplies, and markets for their goods, pirates found it increasingly difficult to operate successfully. The campaign also exploited the inherent weaknesses in pirate society. While the democratic aspects of pirate crews made them effective in some ways, they also made them vulnerable to infiltration and betrayal. Naval officers and colonial agents could join pirate crews as spies, gathering intelligence about their plans and operations. Pirates who were captured could often be convinced to betray their former crewmates in exchange for pardons or reduced sentences. The end of the golden age of piracy came gradually rather than suddenly. But by 1730, large-scale piracy had been effectively eliminated from most of the world's oceans. Individual pirates continued to operate, and piracy remained a problem in some remote areas, but the great pirate fleets and the sophisticated pirate societies they had created were gone forever. The legacy of the pirate codes, however, extends far beyond the relatively brief period when they were actively used. The democratic principles that pirates developed influenced political thinking in ways that are still felt today. The idea that leaders should be elected by those they lead, that major decisions should be made collectively, and that everyone should have equal rights under the law were radical concepts in the 17th and 18th centuries. While pirates certainly didn't invent these ideas, they did demonstrate that they could work in practice, even under the most challenging circumstances. The pirate codes also influenced the development of workers' rights and labor organization. The principle that workers should receive fair compensation for their efforts, that they should have a voice in workplace decisions, and that they should be protected from arbitrary treatment by management were all embodied in pirate codes, centuries before they became accepted in legitimate employment. Some historians argue that pirate crews were among the first examples of democratic worker cooperatives in the modern world. The brutal aspects of the pirate codes are equally important to understand, not because they should be celebrated, but because they reveal the dark side of any system that operates outside the rule of law. The same democratic principles that protected pirates' rights within their crews also legitimized their violence against outsiders. The majority rule that ensured fair treatment for crew members also made it possible for crews to vote to torture prisoners or massacre the inhabitants of captured towns. The pirate codes demonstrate that democracy and brutality are not mutually exclusive, and that popular support can be used to justify terrible crimes as easily as it can protect individual rights. The psychological aspects of the pirate codes are also worth examining. Pirates understood that much of their success depended on reputation and intimidation. A pirate crew that was known for showing mercy to prisoners would face more resistance from future victims, making their operations more dangerous and less profitable. Conversely, a crew with a reputation for extreme brutality could often capture ships without fighting, simply by showing their flag and demanding surrender. This created a perverse incentive for pirates to commit atrocities, not just for personal satisfaction or revenge, but as a deliberate business strategy. The most successful pirates were those who could balance brutality with pragmatism, using violence strategically to achieve their goals while avoiding unnecessary risks. The codes formalized this approach, establishing rules about when violence should be used, how it should be applied, and what purposes it should serve. Pirates developed elaborate torture methods not because they were sadists, though some certainly were, but because torture served specific functions in their operations. Torture could extract information about hidden treasure, force prisoners to reveal the locations of other valuable targets, and create survivors who would spread stories about the pirates' cruelty. The codes specified which torture methods should be used in different situations and established procedures for ensuring that some prisoners survived to tell their stories. One of the most infamous torture methods used by pirates was known as sweating. The victim would be surrounded by pirates holding candles, swords, and other sharp objects, then forced to run around the ship's deck while the pirates jabbed and burned him. This continued until the victim either died from his injuries or revealed the information the pirates wanted. The procedure was designed to be both physically painful and psychologically terrifying, while also providing entertainment for the pirate crew. Another common torture method was woulding, where rope or cord was twisted around the victim's head until it compressed the skull and caused excruciating pain. The pressure could be gradually increased until the victim talked or until his skull cracked. This method was favored because it left visible marks that would be noticed by other potential victims, contributing to the pirates' fearsome reputation. Pirates also used a torture called the boot, where the victim's leg was placed in a metal device that could be tightened to crush bones and tear flesh. This was particularly effective because the resulting injuries were permanent and visible, serving as a lasting reminder of what happened to those who defied pirates. The victim might survive, but would be crippled for life, providing a walking advertisement of pirate brutality. These torture methods were not spontaneous acts of cruelty, but were codified procedures that were taught to new pirates and refined through experience. The codes specified when torture should be used, who should administer it, and what outcomes were expected. This systematic approach to violence was one of the most disturbing aspects of pirate society, showing how organized groups could institutionalize brutality and make it seem normal and necessary. The pirate codes also regulated the treatment of different types of prisoners. Common sailors who surrendered immediately and cooperated with their captors were usually treated relatively well and often given the opportunity to join the pirate crew. Ship officers, who were seen as representatives of the authority and privilege that pirates rejected, were more likely to face harsh treatment or execution. Passengers, particularly wealthy ones, were valuable for ransom, but were also vulnerable to violence if they resisted or tried to conceal their wealth. Women prisoners presented special challenges because the pirate codes generally prohibited women aboard pirate ships. Female prisoners were sometimes released quickly to avoid complications, but they were also vulnerable to sexual violence despite official prohibitions. The code's ban on women was intended to prevent conflicts within pirate crews, but it provided little protection for female prisoners who fell into pirate hands. Children presented another dilemma for pirates. Young children were generally seen as innocent and were often released or left with other passengers. But older children, particularly boys, were sometimes forced to join pirate crews as cabin boys or servants. These child pirates lived under the same codes as adult crew members, but their youth and inexperience made them vulnerable to abuse and exploitation. The international nature of piracy during the Golden Age created additional complications for the pirate codes. Pirate crews often included men from many different countries, cultures, and backgrounds. English, French, Spanish, Dutch, Portuguese, African, and Caribbean pirates all served together on the same ships, bringing different languages, customs, and expectations. The codes had to accommodate this diversity while maintaining unity and discipline within the crew. Language barriers were a constant challenge aboard international pirate crews. Important commands, particularly during battles, had to be understood by everyone regardless of their native language. Pirates developed simplified communication systems, using basic words and gestures that could be understood by speakers of different languages. The codes often specified that certain key phrases related to safety and combat had to be learned by all crew members in a common language, usually English, since many of the most successful pirate captains were English or Welsh. Cultural and religious differences also created tensions that the codes had to address. Christian pirates might object to serving alongside Muslim corsairs from North Africa, while European pirates might have prejudices against African or Korean crew members. The codes generally established that religious and cultural differences were subordinate to crew loyalty, but these tensions never completely disappeared and sometimes erupted into violence. The economic aspects of piracy were also regulated by the codes in ways that revealed the sophisticated business operations that successful pirate crews developed. Pirates had to manage complex financial arrangements involving multiple currencies, fluctuating exchange rates, and uncertain market conditions. Spanish pieces of 8, Portuguese gold coins, English pounds, French livres, and Dutch guilders all circulated in pirate operations, requiring crew members to understand relative values and exchange rates. The codes established procedures for evaluating and dividing different types of treasure. Easily divisible items like coins could be shared according to the established ratios, but more complex goods required appraisal and often had to be sold before the proceeds could be distributed. Jewels, artwork, fine clothing, and other luxury goods had to be evaluated by experts, often requiring pirates to visit major ports where such items could be properly appraised and sold. Ships captured why pirates presented particular challenges because they were valuable but difficult to divide among crew members. Sometimes captured vessels were sold and the proceeds distributed according to the code, but more often they were used to expand the pirate fleet, with volunteers from the original crew transferring to captain the new ship. This expansion process was regulated by detailed procedures that ensured fair selection of new officers and equitable distribution of the original crew among multiple vessels. The codes also addressed the problem of managing large amounts of wealth in a society without banks or other financial institutions. Pirates couldn't simply deposit their earnings in accounts and draw on them as needed. Instead, they had to carry their wealth with them or hide it in secret locations. This created the legendary pirate treasure hoards, but it also created practical problems of storage, security, and access. Some pirate codes established procedures for creating communal treasure hoards that could be accessed by crew members who needed funds for specific purposes. These hoards were typically buried on remote islands, and their locations were known only to senior officers. The code specified how these communal treasures could be accessed, who had authority to authorize withdrawals, and how the remaining crew members would be compensated if part of their collective wealth was used. Individual pirates also created personal treasure hoards, but the codes generally required that these be declared to the crew and that their locations be shared with other officers. This prevented pirates from hiding wealth that should have been shared according to the established ratios and ensured the treasure wouldn't be lost if the pirate who buried it was killed before he could recover it. The medical aspects of pirate life were also regulated by the codes in ways that were remarkably advanced for the time period. Pirates faced constant dangers from combat, accidents, disease, and the harsh conditions of life at sea. Without access to professional medical care, pirate crews had to develop their own healthcare systems. The codes typically specified that crew members who were injured in service would receive compensation from the common fund, but they also established procedures for preventing and treating illness and injury. Pirates who had medical knowledge were highly valued and were often required to share their skills with other crew members. The codes specified that medical supplies should be prioritized when purchasing provisions and that crew members with medical training had special responsibilities to care for their shipmates. Scurvy was a constant threat to pirates, as it was to all sailors of the era. This disease, caused by vitamin C deficiency, could disable entire crews and was often fatal if left untreated. Experienced pirates learned that fresh fruits and vegetables could prevent and cure scurvy, and the codes often specified that ships should stop at inhabited islands whenever possible to obtain fresh provisions. Pirates also discovered that fermented drinks like beer and wine contained enough vitamin C to help prevent scurvy, which explains why pirates consumed so much alcohol. It wasn't just for entertainment or courage in battle. It was actually medical necessity that helped keep crews healthy during long voyages. The codes often specified minimum alcohol rations for crew members, not just as a privilege, but as a health requirement. Injuries from combat and accidents were another constant concern that the codes addressed in detail. Pirates developed surprisingly sophisticated surgical techniques, often learned from crew members who had served in navies or who had worked as barbers, since barbers in that era also performed basic medical procedures. The codes established procedures for treating everything from minor cuts and burns to serious wounds from sword fights and gunshot injuries. Amputation was unfortunately common aboard pirate ships, both because of combat injuries and because of accidents with the ship's machinery and rigging. Pirates developed techniques for performing amputations quickly and with minimal equipment, though the survival rate was still quite low. The code's provisions for compensating disabled pirates were partly motivated by the knowledge that any crew member could lose a limb or suffer permanent injury at any time. The famous pirate peg legs and hook hands weren't just colorful details from adventure stories. They were practical solutions to common injuries that pirates faced. The code specified that disabled pirates should receive appropriate compensation, and that the crew should help provide prosthetic devices when possible. Pirates who lost hands or arms often received metal hooks or wooden attachments that could be used for basic tasks, while those who lost legs received wooden replacements that allowed them to continue working aboard ship. Disease was an even greater threat than combat injuries, and the codes established detailed procedures for preventing the spread of illness aboard ship. Pirates understood that diseases could spread rapidly in the confined spaces of a ship, potentially killing the entire crew. The code specified quarantine procedures for sick crew members, cleaning requirements for living spaces, and protocols for disposing of contaminated materials. Pirates were among the first sailors to understand the importance of basic hygiene in preventing disease. The codes often required regular bathing, cleaning of clothing and bedding, and proper disposal of waste. These requirements weren't based on modern germ theory, which hadn't been developed yet, but on practical experience that showed clean crews were healthier crews. The codes also addressed mental health issues, though they didn't use modern terminology or understanding. Pirates recognized that the stress and trauma of their lifestyle could affect crew members' ability to function effectively. The codes established procedures for dealing with crew members who became unreliable, erratic, or dangerous due to what we would now recognize as psychological problems. Some pirates developed what would now be called post-traumatic stress disorder from the violence and trauma they experienced and witnessed. The codes provided mechanisms for removing such pirates from active duty while still ensuring they received their shares of prize money. Pirates who became unable to fight or work effectively weren't simply abandoned. They were often given shore assignments or were left at friendly ports with enough money to support themselves. The role of alcohol in pirate society extended beyond medical necessity to serve important social and psychological functions that the codes recognized and regulated. Alcohol helped pirates cope with the stress and trauma of their lifestyle, provided entertainment during long, boring periods at sea, and served as a social lubricant that helped men from different backgrounds work together effectively. However, excessive drinking could be dangerous aboard ship, leading to accidents, fights, and poor decision-making during critical situations. The codes established detailed rules about alcohol consumption that balanced these competing concerns. Most codes specified that alcohol should be available to all crew members, but that drinking should be regulated during certain activities like navigation, combat, and ship maintenance. Some codes prohibited drinking entirely during battles or when entering dangerous waters, while others simply required that drunk crew members be confined to quarters where they couldn't endanger others. The famous pirate drinking songs and celebration rituals that are portrayed in popular culture were actually important aspects of crew morale and unity that the codes recognized and protected. Pirates who had survived dangerous battles or successful raids needed ways to release tension and celebrate their achievements. The codes often specified that crews should hold formal celebrations after successful operations, with extra alcohol rations and relaxed discipline to allow crew members to bond and reinforce their group identity. Music played a crucial role in pirate society that extended far beyond simple entertainment. The codes often specified that musicians should be recruited whenever possible, and that they should be given special status and privileges within the crew. Music served multiple functions aboard pirate ships. It helped coordinate work activities like raising sails and hauling anchors. It provided entertainment during long voyages. It boosted morale before battles, and it helped create the psychological atmosphere that pirates used to intimidate their enemies. The famous sea shanties that are associated with pirate culture were actually work songs that helped crews perform coordinated physical labor. The rhythm of the music helped ensure that All crew members pulled ropes or turned winches at the same time, making the work more efficient and reducing the risk of accidents. The codes often specified that certain songs should be used for specific work activities, and that all crew members should learn these songs, regardless of their musical abilities. Pirates also used music as a form of psychological warfare. The sound of pirates singing as they approached a potential target could be deeply unsettling to their intended victims, suggesting that the attackers were confident and eager for battle. Some pirate crews developed signature songs that became associated with their particular group, contributing to their reputation and helping to spread fear among merchant sailors. The codes established procedures for using music strategically, specifying when crews should sing to intimidate enemies, and when they should remain silent to avoid detection. The educational aspects of pirate society were also addressed by the codes, though in ways that differed significantly from formal education systems. Pirates needed to learn a wide variety of skills to be effective crew members: navigation, seamanship, combat techniques, languages, and basic business practices. The codes established systems for teaching these skills to new recruits and for ensuring that knowledge was shared throughout the crew. Navigation was perhaps the most critical skill that pirates needed to master. Without accurate navigation, pirate crews could become lost at sea, miss profitable opportunities, or sail into dangerous waters where they might be captured by naval forces. The codes typically specified that navigation knowledge should be shared among multiple crew members rather than concentrated in a single navigator, ensuring that the crew could continue operating even if their primary navigator was killed or disabled. Pirates developed innovative navigation techniques that combined traditional methods with practical knowledge gained from experience. They created detailed charts of profitable hunting grounds, noting the typical routes followed by merchant ships, the locations of safe harbors and supply stations, and the patrol patterns of naval vessels. These charts were valuable strategic resources that were carefully guarded and shared only with trusted crew members. Language skills were also highly valued among pirates because they facilitated communication with potential victims, local officials, and merchants in various ports. Pirates who could speak multiple languages were often assigned to handle negotiations with prisoners, arrange for supplies and repairs, and gather intelligence about potential targets. The code sometimes specified that crew members should learn basic phrases in the languages commonly used in their operating areas. Combat training was another educational responsibility that the codes addressed systematically. New pirates needed to learn how to use swords, pistols, and other weapons effectively, but they also needed to understand pirate fighting tactics and strategies. Experienced pirates were required to train newcomers in combat techniques, teaching them how to board enemy ships, how to fight in the confined spaces below deck, and how to coordinate with other crew members during battles. The codes established formal training procedures that ensured all crew members achieved minimum competency levels in essential combat skills. Pirates who were particularly skilled with weapons were often designated as instructors and received additional compensation for their teaching responsibilities. These combat instructors developed standardized training methods that could be used to prepare new recruits quickly and effectively. Business skills were equally important for pirates, who needed to understand how to evaluate stolen goods, negotiate with merchants, and manage their financial affairs. The codes established procedures for teaching crew members how to recognize valuable cargo, how to assess the quality of different goods, and how to conduct business transactions in various ports. Pirates also needed to understand the legal and political systems in different regions, knowledge that could mean the difference between successful operations and capture by authorities. The codes recognized that this knowledge was constantly changing as political situations evolved and new laws were enacted. Experienced pirates were required to share intelligence about changing conditions in different areas, ensuring that the entire crew remained informed about potential opportunities and dangers. The relationship between different pirate crews was regulated by complex codes of conduct that governed everything from territorial disputes to cooperative ventures. Pirates understood that excessive competition between crews could be counterproductive, leading to unnecessary conflicts that weakened all participants and made it easier for authorities to suppress piracy altogether. At the same time, pirate crews were inherently competitive organizations that needed to maintain their independence and protect their interests. The codes established procedures for resolving disputes between pirate crews without resorting to violence. These procedures often involved formal negotiations between representatives of the competing crews, with neutral arbitrators helping to reach mutually acceptable solutions. Some pirate havens developed sophisticated legal systems for handling inter-crew disputes, with established courts and recognized legal procedures that all crews agreed to respect. Cooperative ventures between pirate crews were also regulated by detailed agreements that specified how costs, risks, and profits would be shared. Large-scale operations like attacking heavily fortified ports or capturing major treasure fleets required coordination between multiple crews. But such cooperation was always complicated by questions of leadership, authority, and benefit distribution. The codes established frameworks for temporary alliances that allowed crews to work together while maintaining their independence. Pirate confederations sometimes developed that included dozens of crews operating under loose central coordination. These confederations were held together by mutual benefit rather than formal authority, with individual crews free to leave if they became dissatisfied with the arrangement. The most successful confederations were those that could balance the benefits of cooperation with respect for individual crew autonomy. The intelligence networks that pirates developed were remarkably sophisticated and were regulated by codes that specified how information should be gathered, verified, and shared. Pirates needed accurate intelligence about merchant ship movements, naval patrol patterns, political developments, and market conditions in various ports. This intelligence was gathered through networks of informants that included corrupt officials, merchant sailors, tavern keepers, and other individuals who had access to valuable information. The codes established procedures for recruiting and managing informants, specifying how they should be compensated and how their information should be verified. Pirates understood that inaccurate intelligence could lead to failed operations, unnecessary risks, and potential disasters. They developed methods for cross-checking information from multiple sources and for testing the reliability of new informants. Some pirate crews employed full-time intelligence specialists who were responsible for maintaining informant networks and analyzing the information they provided. These specialists were highly valued crew members who often received compensation comparable to ship officers. The codes protected intelligence operations by specifying that information about sources and methods should be shared only with senior crew members, and that informants should never be identified to people outside the crew. The codes also addressed the complex relationships between pirates and various European governments, which often employed pirates as unofficial agents while publicly condemning piracy. Many successful pirates held commissions as privators from one or more governments, giving them legal authority to attack enemy shipping while providing them with protection against prosecution by friendly nations. However, these relationships were often ambiguous and could change rapidly as political situations evolved. Pirates who held privateer commissions had to navigate complex legal and political requirements that were often contradictory or unclear. A pirate who was legally authorized to attack Spanish ships might find himself branded as a criminal if he accidentally captured a vessel belonging to a Spanish ally of his sponsoring government. The codes established procedures for managing these relationships, specifying how crews should handle encounters with naval vessels from different nations and how they should respond to changes in their legal status. Some pirates became skilled diplomatic agents who could negotiate with colonial governors and naval commanders to secure favorable treatment for their crews. These negotiations often involved complex exchanges of information, prisoners, and stolen goods, with pirates providing services to colonial governments in exchange for protection and support. The codes recognized that these diplomatic relationships were essential for long-term success and established procedures for conducting such negotiations safely and effectively. The economic impact of piracy on colonial and European economies was enormous and was partly shaped by the systematic approach that pirate codes brought to criminal operations. By organizing their activities according to established procedures and long-term strategies, pirates were able to disrupt trade routes, influence market prices, and affect the economic development of entire regions. The codes enabled pirates to operate more efficiently and effectively than they could have as individual criminals, multiplying their economic impact. Insurance costs for merchant shipping increased dramatically in areas where organized pirate fleets operated, making trade more expensive and reducing profit margins for legitimate merchants. Some trade routes became so dangerous that they were effectively abandoned, forcing merchants to use longer, more expensive alternatives. Colonial ports that had previously thrived as centers of maritime commerce found their economies disrupted by pirate activity. However, the economic impact of piracy wasn't entirely negative from the colonial perspective. Pirates brought large amounts of Spanish silver and other foreign goods into colonial markets, providing currency and trade items that were otherwise difficult to obtain. They also created demand for supplies, repairs, and services in colonial ports, generating income for local merchants and craftsmen. Some colonial communities became economically dependent on pirate spending, creating political pressure to maintain friendly relationships with pirate crews, even when such relationships violated official policies. The codes facilitated these economic relationships by establishing procedures for conducting business with colonial merchants and officials. Pirates understood that maintaining good relationships with supply sources was essential for long-term success, and the codes specified how crews should conduct themselves in colonial ports to avoid unnecessary conflicts with local authorities. The demographic impact of piracy was also significant and was influenced by the recruitment and retention policies established by pirate codes. Pirates drew their crews from the maritime populations of various nations, recruiting experienced sailors who might otherwise have served on merchant ships or naval vessels. The democratic and egalitarian principles of pirate society attracted many men who had been mistreated or exploited in legitimate maritime employment. The code's provisions for fair treatment, democratic decision-making, and equitable profit sharing made piracy an attractive alternative for sailors who had experienced harsh discipline, low wages, and dangerous working conditions on merchant and naval vessels. Some historians estimate that during the peak years of the golden age of piracy, a significant percentage of experienced sailors in the Atlantic world had some involvement with pirate operations. This demographic shift had important implications for legitimate maritime commerce, as merchants and naval commanders found it increasingly difficult to recruit and retain qualified crews. The codes also influenced the development of maritime law and international relations in ways that extended far beyond the pirate era. The legal precedents established by pirate trials and the international cooperation required to suppress piracy contributed to the development of modern maritime law and international criminal law. The recognition that piracy was a crime against all nations rather than just the nation whose flag was attacked by pirates helped establish important principles of universal jurisdiction that continue to influence international law today. The democratic principles embodied in pirate codes also influenced political developments in ways that are still debated by historians. Some scholars argue that the democratic practices developed by pirates contributed to the broader movement toward representative government and individual rights that characterized the 18th and 19th centuries. Pirates demonstrated that democratic principles could work in practice, even under extremely challenging circumstances, providing examples that influenced later political theorists and revolutionaries. The American Revolution, which began just a few decades after the end of the golden age of piracy, incorporated many principles that had been pioneered by pirate crews. Elected leadership, majority rule, individual rights, and resistance to arbitrary authority. While it would be an exaggeration to say that pirates caused the American Revolution, the democratic traditions they established certainly contributed to the intellectual and cultural environment that made revolution possible. The international nature of pirate crews also contributed to the development of more cosmopolitan and tolerant attitudes toward cultural and racial differences. Pirates were among the first European-dominated organizations to operate on principles of relative racial equality, with African, Caribbean, and indigenous American crew members serving alongside Europeans in positions of authority and responsibility. While pirate society was certainly not free from racism and prejudice, it was more egalitarian than most contemporary organizations. The codes formalized these egalitarian principles by establishing that crew members should be judged based on their contributions to the crew's success rather than their racial or cultural background. This represented a significant departure from the racial hierarchies that dominated colonial society and may have contributed to the gradual development of more egalitarian attitudes in maritime communities. The technological innovations developed by pirates were also influenced by the systematic approach encouraged by pirate codes. Pirates needed to maximize their effectiveness while operating with limited resources and without access to government support or military infrastructure. This encouraged them to develop innovative solutions to technical problems and to adopt new technologies more quickly than traditional naval forces. Pirates were among the first to adopt improved firearms, navigation instruments, and ship design. Innovations. The codes encouraged technological innovation by specifying that crews should invest in the best equipment available and that crew members who developed useful innovations should be rewarded for their contributions. Some pirates became skilled inventors and engineers who developed new weapons, improved ship designs, and better navigation techniques. The intelligence gathering and communication systems developed by pirates were particularly sophisticated and influenced later military and intelligence operations. Pirates created networks of informants and agents that spanned multiple continents, developed coded communication systems that could operate across language barriers, and established procedures for gathering and analyzing intelligence that were more advanced than those used by many government agencies. These systems were regulated by codes that specified how intelligence should be collected, verified, and shared among crew members and allied crews. The psychological warfare techniques developed by pirates were also codified and systematized in ways that influenced later military thinking. Pirates understood that much of their success depended on reputation and intimidation rather than actual combat effectiveness. They developed sophisticated methods for creating and maintaining fearsome reputations, including specific procedures for treating prisoners, staging dramatic attacks, and ensuring that stories of their exploits spread throughout the maritime community. The codes established detailed procedures for psychological operations that were designed to maximize the terror impact of pirate activities while minimizing the actual violence required. Pirates learned that a few well-publicized atrocities could be more effective than numerous small-scale attacks because they created a reputation that made future victims more likely to surrender without fighting. The environmental impact of piracy was also significant and was partly shaped by the operational procedures established by pirate codes. Pirates needed to find secure bases where they could repair their ships, store supplies, and hide from pursuing naval forces. This led them to establish permanent settlements on remote islands and coastal areas that had previously been uninhabited or only lightly settled. These pirate settlements often had significant environmental impacts, including deforestation for shipbuilding and fuel, overhunting of local wildlife for food, and pollution from waste disposal and industrial activities. The codes established procedures for managing these environmental impacts, partly to ensure the long-term viability of pirate bases and partly to maintain good relationships with local populations who might be affected by environmental degradation. The cultural impact of piracy extended far beyond the immediate participants and was influenced by the systematic documentation and communication practices established by pirate codes. Pirates were among the first criminal organizations to maintain detailed records of their activities, partly for business purposes and partly to ensure fair distribution of profits according to code provisions. These records, along with the testimonies of captured pirates and their victims, provided detailed information about pirate society that has fascinated historians, writers, and the general public for centuries. The codes themselves became cultural artifacts that influenced popular understanding of piracy and contributed to the romanticized image of pirates as democratic rebels fighting against oppressive authority, while this romanticized image overlooked the brutal realities of pirate life. It captured something important about the democratic and egalitarian aspects of pirate society that distinguished it from the authoritarian systems that dominated the rest of the world. The literary and artistic impact of pirate culture has been enormous and continues to influence popular entertainment today. The democratic ideals embodied in pirate codes, combined with the adventurous and rebellious aspects of pirate life, created a powerful cultural myth that has inspired countless books, movies, and other forms of entertainment. While these fictional portrayals often ignore or minimize the violent and criminal aspects of historical piracy, they have kept alive the memory of the democratic principles that pirates pioneered. The modern fascination with pirate culture reflects a continuing attraction to the ideals of freedom, equality, and adventure that pirate codes represented, even if most people are unaware of the historical reality behind these ideals. Popular culture has focused on the romantic and adventurous aspects of piracy, while largely ignoring the systematic violence and criminal exploitation that were equally central to pirate society. The educational value of studying pirate codes extends beyond their historical significance to their relevance for understanding modern organizational and legal issues. The codes represent early examples of constitutional government, democratic decision-making, and worker organization that anticipated many later developments in political and social organization. They also demonstrate how criminal organizations can develop sophisticated internal governance systems while remaining fundamentally predatory in their relationships with outsiders. Modern criminal organizations, terrorist groups, and other illegal enterprises often develop internal codes and governance systems that share characteristics with historical pirate codes. Understanding how these systems work and why they develop can provide insights into contemporary security and law enforcement challenges. The democratic aspects of pirate codes also raise important questions about the relationship between democracy and morality, since pirates used democratic procedures to make decisions about activities that were fundamentally criminal and often brutal. The study of pirate codes also provides insights into the development of maritime law, international law, and the global economy. The legal precedents established during the suppression of piracy contributed to modern concepts of universal jurisdiction, crimes against humanity, and international cooperation in law enforcement. The economic impact of piracy influenced the development of international trade, insurance systems, and naval strategy in ways that continue to affect the modern global economy. As we reach the end of our journey through the brutal and fascinating World of Pirate Codes. It's important to remember that we've been exploring a complex historical phenomenon that defies simple categorization. The pirates of the Golden Age were simultaneously progressive democrats and ruthless criminals, innovative organizers and destructive predators, symbols of freedom and agents of terror. Their codes reflected this complexity, establishing sophisticated systems of governance and justice, while also institutionalizing violence and criminality on an unprecedented scale. The pirate codes were real, they were detailed, they were systematically enforced, and they were absolutely brutal in ways that popular culture has never fully captured. But they were also remarkably progressive and democratic, embodying principles of equality, representation, and workers' rights that were centuries ahead of their time. Understanding this paradox helps us appreciate both the achievements and the limitations of human social organization, reminding us that good intentions and democratic procedures are not sufficient to create just and moral societies. The legacy of the pirate codes continues to influence our world in ways both obvious and subtle. The democratic principles they embodied contributed to the development of modern representative government and individual rights. The international cooperation required to suppress piracy helped establish precedents for modern international law and law enforcement cooperation. The economic impact of piracy influenced the development of global trade and maritime commerce. Perhaps most importantly, the pirate codes remind us that human beings are capable of creating sophisticated and effective social organizations under even the most challenging circumstances, but that such organizations can be used for both good and evil purposes depending on the values and goals of their members. The same organizational principles that enabled pirates to create relatively egalitarian and democratic societies also enabled them to commit systematic violence and exploitation on a massive scale. As you drift off to sleep tonight, whether you're listening from New York or London, Tokyo or Sydney, remember that the ocean waves that might be lapping at shores near you once carried ships full of men who had chosen to live by codes that were both more democratic and more brutal than anything in our modern world. These men created societies that were in some ways more free and equal than the legitimate governments of their time. But they paid for this freedom with violence and crime that terrorized entire regions and cost thousands of innocent lives. The pirate codes were real. They were complex, they were effective, and they were absolutely brutal. But they were also a remarkable example of human ingenuity and social organization that continues to fascinate and instruct us centuries after. The last great pirate captain was hanged, and the golden age of piracy came to its bloody end. Sweet dreams, and thank you for joining me on this journey into one of history's most misunderstood and remarkable chapters.